It is January 5th of 2026, and today I wanted to talk about Tim Walz as he had just announced that he is not running for re-election due to what had happened in Minnesota with the growing story about the Somalian daycares and the fraud that had happened there. The reason why I wanted to talk about this particular story again is to just kind of shed some light on the fact that I think that there are more powerful things to be celebrated here rather than just it being, a victory of Republicans over Democrats. I think that it's on a bigger level. This is a win against corruption, and you kind of see where all this money is going, and it kind of answers the question of why we're not seeing anything get better. And I think that's how a lot of people are really viewing this story, is it's an answer to a question that's been on a lot of Americans' minds, which are, why are things getting worse and not better? And I think that that's why this story was so powerful, is because I think it gives an avenue and a possible answer for that question. But moving to the focus of the video, I wanted to read the New York Times article about this story, and they were saying that Tim Walz drops re-election bid and Amy Klobuchar may run instead. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Mr. Walz said a growing scandal over fraud in social services programs led him to abandon his run for a third term as governor of Minnesota. Yep, I would say that's a pretty good picture to pick for that caption there, because it's kind of a no-brainer. But Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota said on Monday that he was abandoning his bid for re-election to a third term, and Senator Amy Klobuchar, a fellow Democrat, is considering seeking the office. Two people briefed on conversations between the two politicians said. I'm actually not really familiar with Ms. Klobuchar, as I'm not living in Minnesota, so I'm not really familiar with her career at all. I don't really have much to say about that. He informed her of her plans, confirmed interest. For Mr. Walz, the Democratic nominee for vice president in the 2024 election, the departure caps a brief rise in national politics. Mr. Walz said a widening scandal over fraud in social services programs in Minnesota had persuaded him to drop out of the race. Mr. Walz had been criticized for his administration's oversight of the programs and its failure to prevent widespread fraud. I came to the conclusion that I can't give a political campaign my all, Mr. Walz said in a statement. Every minute I spend defending my own political interests would be a minute I can't spend defending the people of Minnesota against the criminals who prey on our generosity and the cynics who prey on our differences. But I mean, even this statement about defending the people of Minnesota, you were the governor of Minnesota, and it was your responsibility already. Like, you were in a position to defend them against this fraud, and you clearly didn't. That's why the fraud is happening. So even his whole argument of dropping the campaign to defend his political interest would be a minute I can't spend defending the people of Minnesota. I mean, wouldn't the best place to make a change and defend these people would be to be the governor of Minnesota? I don't understand his argument here. That doesn't really make much sense to me. But moving forward, Mr. Walz has scheduled a news conference on Monday where he is expected to discuss his decision. Ms. Klobuchar did not respond to any requests for comment on Monday morning, so his replacement has not even really answered any requests for today, since today is Monday. Mr. Walz's decision jolts a race that had drawn an unusually large and strong slate of Republican candidates, including the Speaker of the Minnesota House, Lisa DeMuth, and Mike Lindell, the chief executive of MyPillow and an ally of President Trump. Yeah, I remember that. Republicans have not won a statewide race in Minnesota since 2006, but they have expressed confidence that this year's governor race would be different. Yeah, I wonder why. I mean, maybe it's the huge amount of money that has left the state under Tim Walz's reign as governor. Maybe it's maybe that has something to do with it. I'm not really entirely sure. I'm not sure what it could be. Democrats in the state had voiced concern in recent weeks that Mr. Walz's presence on the ticket might lessen the chances for other Democrats in November. Yeah, I mean, it really depends. It's like if you have people within your state that think that, Tim Walz really had nothing to do with the fraud, that's really the only avenue I could see them or him hurting other Democrats' chances, because then they're essentially going to split the vote. But it's like how, I mean, really, it's like, do you really believe that people aren't immediately coming to the conclusion that, Tim Walz isn't at fault here? I think it's the media that are really running with this and trying to defend Tim Walz. But I think if you talk to a majority of people, I mean, this is like a question of what do you think the majority is doing? I think a majority of people hold him accountable. I mean, he was the leader of the state, he was the governor. It only makes sense that they're really holding on to him. I think anyone with an agenda or someone in news is really the only one who's defending like Tim Walz outright and is saying that, there's nothing to see here, move along. These aren't the droids you're looking for. To me, that's like a completely like fabricated narrative. I think even at best, most normal people are saying like we should take a look at this and we should investigate it. I think like unless you're like a bot or you work for one of these news companies that is just towing the line, you're the only one that is just outright saying like again, like these aren't the droids you're looking for, like this is a nothing burger. I think at best most people want this to be investigated further. They think there's enough here where we should be looking more into it. But that's just my opinion. But let's see. Mr. Walt's exit comes amid national scrutiny of his handling of the welfare fraud scandal, which Mr. Trump and other top Republicans have assailed him for in recent weeks. And yeah, I mean, I don't really necessarily agree with that either. It's like this isn't. I mean, I know why they're trying to play this as like Democrats versus Republicans. I mean, it's obvious. It's like everyone in politics is basically doing that now. But at the same point, if you want to think about this broadly as like a civilian and you're not involved in politics like a normal dude, it's like, I don't know, what does it matter if this is the Democrats' fault? Trump was president during at least one of the terms, presumably, since this fraud started happening. I mean, it even says Republicans have not won a statewide race in Minnesota since 2006. So you could argue that, Republicans in the state maybe aren't responsible for this fraud since they didn't have control. But I mean, we've had a Republican president that was in office at the time. You would think that fraud, especially of this scale, I mean, we're talking about billions of dollars. Like, this is money that is leaving the country through one of your states. So it's like, I don't know. No matter how you look at it, this is like a broad failure of government, like of everyone involved. This is not merely just, Democrats are bad and Republicans are good. It's like this whole apparatus that is responsible for protecting this country, like, supremely fucked up. That's really what I think the problem is. And like all this other, hoopla and all these narratives that are being pushed in the media of trying to, blame it wholeheartedly on Democrats. Again, I get it. It's like Trump has been the target of Democrats forever. Democrats are always the ones that are getting away. Like, whatever narrative you want to believe, it makes sense why they're attacking each other. But again, what I'm saying is if you as a civilian can kind of zoom out on this and look at it from an outward perspective, it's like this is still America's money that is just leaving the country. If you want things to get better and you think that we should be in a better spot because of how much money we're making, how they like to flaunt that like our GDP is booming, but you're not seeing that tangibly here in the country. I mean, this is like a huge avenue of this. This is, this isn't necessarily like the leaky ship example. This is like a huge hole in your ship and you're just like leaking, water is coming in. And basically this fraud situation, no matter how you look at it, the billions of dollars that are leaving the country, this is like a huge, massive hole in our oil tanker and we're just losing our payload into the water. And I mean, obviously the irony of that is like Venezuela just got taken over recently. So I mean, yeah, that's the best example I got, and I would say that's the most current example, currently relevant. Mr. Walz, 61, a former public school teacher who served in Congress for 12 years before becoming governor, had signaled ambivalence last year about seeking a third term. During the summer, shortly before announcing he would run again, the governor said in an interview that he had been trying to gauge whether Minnesotans wanted him to stay in office. Well, it looks like he came to the conclusion that that answer was a resounding no. I think you need to think through, well, do you have the ability to do the job? Have you done well? Describing the questions he was wrestling with. Yeah, those are, I mean, you know what? Everyone's been picking on Tim. I'd say that's a pretty good barometer for kind of measuring whether you should run again. So I don't have much to say about that. Excuse me. In September, Mr. Walz announced that he did intend to run again. At this time, he said he was proud of a legacy that included passing numerous bills that pushed the state to the left in 2023, when Democrats had majorities in both chambers of the state legislature. And I think that's the biggest question for a lot of Republicans, or people that are really trying to get like Tim Walz to really go down for this, or to have like an agenda to have Tim Walz look really bad. I think this is the smoking gun that they're trying to find, is whether all of this started in 2023, or whether this happened further back than that, or whether they're trying to see if this was really a huge instigator for if the fraud got worse, or if it started happening there. And I think that would be a really big story if it broke, because I think Tim Walz would be completely done after that. And even now, it's like, there's a lot of discussion about what would constitute being a traitor to the country, or what would constitute treason in the country. And I think, if there is a big story that breaks with here, I think you're going to get the smoking gun to kind of prove that, because, being taken advantage of is one thing, but to see outright collusion, and to see that he knew what he was doing, and to establish motive, would be huge. And I'm obviously not advocating for that, because I would hope that he's not guilty of doing that. But what I will say is that with all the things that have been happening in the country, I think people are really tired of being taken advantage of. And I don't think they're going to be happy to find out this is true, if it is true. But soon after he announced that decision, the fraud scandal began dogging his candidacy. So even New York Times is kind of trying to make this seem like they're just basically throwing shade on the legitimacy of the fraud scandal and the Nick Shirley story by saying this. In my opinion, at least. I mean, they could be saying that objectively, but soon after he announced that decision, the fraud scandal began dogging his candidacy. I mean, I guess that's pretty unbiased. But later in September, federal prosecutors announced that an investigation into fraud in a COVID-19 program meant to feed children had broadened to include other safety net programs administered by Mr. Walz's administration. Federal prosecutors have asserted that as much as $9 billion may have been stolen over a period of years when Mr. Walz's administration was overseeing state programs. More than 90 people have been charged with felonies in the federal fraud cases to date, and at least 60 have been convicted. That's good. The vast majority of defendants are of Somali origin. Yeah, and that's been like a really big way of mainstream media kind of discrediting it, is just kind of making this about race, when I think overall most of the people that are blaming Somalians are just really speaking about this as a matter of fact. Like, their majority of the defense, like even New York Times, who is, presumably majority left-leaning, they're even making this matter-of-fact statement, and it's just like an it is what it is situation. Regardless of who's doing it, the news has to convey who that is. They're Somalian, and we have to decide on what the appropriate punishment is. And a crime is a crime. If they're committing crimes, they should be deported, or they should at least be treated as, felons that would be committing this crime in the United States. I mean, either one. I think there's an argument for a deportation, because, why should we as taxpayers have to pay to jail these people, which I think is pretty fair. I mean, deportation seems like the most logical argument, but that's where the debate really should be going, is how to deal with this and how to prevent it. But all of this talk about, like, is this racist and we're picking on Somalians, it's like, this is just noise. And it's really ruining the conversation and the debate around people who are genuinely trying to understand this, because to just say that it's racist removes the context that they're committing fraud and that they're majority the ones behind it. This isn't just picking on Somalians. This is just calling a spade a spade. And just like with this topic and like a lot of other debates like immigration, where there's like no distinction of illegal immigration versus natural or legal immigration, they all get bundled into one. This is kind of the same thing, where they just see like race being brought up and it's like, oh, they're being racist against Somalians. It's like, no, they're identifying the people who are doing this, and rightfully so. I mean, this needs to be identified and it needs to be corrected, because the main goal is to prevent this from happening again. It's not to just let it happen or to give them a pass to do it. And that's what this whole racism story is doing, is you're giving them a pass by saying that any criticism against them is racist. That's not even really applicable here. It's not like some people will obviously say that. I mean, there are racists in the world that will say like Somalians are going to be scammers or they're going to be fraudsters, etc. But overall, this is just a matter of these people are doing it, and it's an issue that needs to be corrected. It's really that simple at the end of the day. That's where the debate lies, is who's doing it and how do we fix it, not are we being racist. So that has nothing to do with it, at least on as far as like the actual problem here, if we're trying to be actually serious about trying to solve the problem. But let's see, Mr. Walz has acknowledged that fraud has become a pervasive problem in the state, and he announced a series of measures to improve oversight. But as the scandal continued to make national headlines, providing Republicans a powerful line of attack, Democrats began expressing worry that the scandal would hobble Mr. Walz's campaign. And even this article, who wrote this? This is actually retarded that they would say this. So in lieu of them finding out that probably one of the biggest fraud stories is discovered, they're going to say that Democrats were worried more about the campaign than the fraud. It's like if you're a news organization writing for Democrats, this comes across like really bad. And I'm not even really like extremely conservative, but just trying to figure out what's going on. Like, that whole sentence was bad. That needed to be omitted, in my opinion, if you're trying to do propaganda correctly. The leading Republicans running for governor have made combating fraud their signature issue. Many Republicans accuse Mr. Walz and fellow Democrats of failing to respond forcefully to red flags about the theft in state-run programs, in part because Somali Americans are an influential voting bloc for Democrats. Mr. Walz has called that accusation baseless. I don't know if that's necessarily baseless, because really the whole thing behind this is they're just trying to establish motive, with Walz running defense for them. And, this is just Occam's razor and using logic. It's like, perceivably, if you have this block of people who are from Somalia and are defrauding your state, you would think that overall Tim Walz would be very critical of them. But the fact that he's even really trying to cover for them is raising more questions than answers, because now they're really trying to establish his motive. And I think that's a fair question to ask. And, that might not be what Mr. Walz is doing here. I don't necessarily fully think that without seeing any proof, but I think it's important to ask that question, because I think that needs to be determined. If someone is working in government that actually has foreign countries as their priority, because that is definitionally treason. But even as we make progress in the fight against fraudsters, we now see an organized group of political actors seeking to take advantage of the crisis, Mr. Walz said in the statement announcing he was dropping out. The Trump administration has repeatedly focused on the fraud scandal and threatened to cut funding for Minnesota safety net programs, arguing that Democrats in the state could not be trusted to prevent taxpayer funds from being stolen. And I think that's pretty true. He's just saying that under your leadership, your whole state was defrauded for not just millions, but billions of dollars. Why would we be inclined to give you any money while not only is that being investigated, but your own involvement with it has not even been determined yet. I think that's entirely fair for this kind of criticism and this to take place, at least during an investigation. I don't think the Trump administration is saying they're never going to restore funding. They're just pausing it in order to determine, in order to stop the bleeding. Like, we're losing money and we need to stop this money from leaving the country as a main priority. That's entirely reasonable. Over the weekend, the White House has announced that the Department of Justice was sending additional personnel and resources to Minnesota to crush Minnesota's fraud epidemic. These complex criminal networks didn't build themselves overnight on Tim Walz's watch, and rooting them out completely requires thorough, methodical work to build cases that secure convictions and recover taxpayer dollars. Right, and that's the thing that's important, is that these roots that are in the Minnesotan government, this takes time to build it to this scale. I mean, even just the nature of like the amount of it, and let's say, the video with Nick Shirley and the amount and the amount and the degree to which they're doing it. I mean, like $9 billion. The fact of the matter is $9 billion is a lot of money. So we have to determine the degree to which they were siphoning it off, and the amount and how vast this goes. Because it's like, if this is only one state, that's the big thing that people are talking about, where one state was exploited, and this is a $9 billion exploit that we're identifying. If this is happening in other states, or even if there are other operations like this throughout Minnesota, really the question is, how far does this go? Interest in the fraud scandal grew in the past week following a viral video created by Nick Shirley, a conservative content creator. In the video, Mr. Shirley purported to have exposed rampant fraud in government-subsidized daycare centers run by Somalis in the Minneapolis area. It's so funny how they could just be saying like matter of fact. I was going to say that they're using this kind of label to discredit it, but I can't really say that exactly like 100% about New York Times, just how they wrote it here, but I will say in like a broader context, that's definitely, the big conversation that's going on is basically establishment media versus independent journalism. And even news outlets who you would think would agree with this, or, try to add on to this story about the fraud, they're really just questioning his credibility as a journalist. And, that's the big reason why this whole story is just being politicized, or that's how you can identify the people who are trying to politicize the story, is because they're not necessarily talking about the fraud per se or whether it's happening. If they're really just talking about his credibility as a journalist, then that's like clearly a political piece. They're really just trying to discredit content creators at that point. They're not even really talking about the main issue at hand here. The video, which did not conclusively prove malfeasance, there it is. So they are throwing shots at Nick Shirley's credibility. Drew praise from top officials in the Trump administration and Minnesota Republicans. I wonder why. I mean, obviously this was really like a big smoking gun for them. So like the fact that they support this isn't really anything crazy. It's kind of like a water is wet kind of thing. On Monday, Republicans in the state suggested that they would continue to focus on the fraud issue even with Mr. Walz out of the race. I mean, yeah, this needs to be solved. The fact that they even need to say this, and that they would have been like, oh yes, we'll continue allowing this fraud here in the state, and Mr. Walz is no longer governor. Yeah, like no shit that they're going to continue investigating this. Minnesota's fraud epidemic extends well beyond any one individual, said Harry Niska, a Republican state representative. It is the result of nearly 2 decades of Democrat governors backed by their legislative allies, creating a culture of complacency that has cost Minnesotans and their families billions of dollars. I mean, yeah, this is really like the big thing that has to be determined. If it's not just really about the fraud, like the fraud happening is one thing, but really the goal of Republicans, at least in this narrative, is to establish the fact that this was the fault of Democrats. The way that Democrats are going about defending this, where they're not even really engaging with the fraud discussion, and they're just trying to, say that Trump is racist, or anyone being critical of the Somalians is racist. I mean, even, obviously, I'm beating a horse to death with the topic of my other videos, but this is like deflection. Like, they're really not doing any favors by making this whole discussion around fraud to be a discussion about racism. The fact of the matter is, the amount of money, well, let me rephrase this. The fact that fraud is happening already is inexcusable, as this is a crime, but the fact that it's $9 billion, like, that's crazy. The fact that it's not only just crime, but it's to this degree, like, this is really the crazy part about it. And I think this has like a broader implication about on discussions such as like welfare programs for immigrants, as well as, you know, the degree of immigration that we're going to allow. I think really those are the two big factors that are really affected by this discussion here with bringing up the Somalians, as far as the political implications. This is either just about gross negligence or really just about Tim Walz's, you know, abilities to govern the country and to be a politician, really. Those are the two big things that I think are really in question here. And, you know, just the fact, and this also is a smoking gun for Democrats, because this really hurts any credibility they have for picking good candidates, because this really shows that, you know, Tim Walz was the vice presidential nominee for Kamala Harris. So now, wrapped up into all of this, and, you know, the question of fraud and all these other things that I mentioned, really the other big factor and the other thing that Republicans are going to hammer home is that that Democrats really don't know what the fuck they're doing. You know, the fact that they almost that they ran Tim Walz, that this was happening all under his watch. Like, these are all other things too that I think are valid, but, you know, as far as how we move forward and how to fix this problem, the real topics, I think, are, you know, what constitutes a failure as a governor, allowing this kind of fraud, should there be punishments, and it just shows again the gross ineptitude of Tim Walz to allow this to happen on every level, whether he was taken advantage of or if he knew it was happening. Ms. Klobuchar, 65, a former state prosecutor, has long held ambitions beyond her state Senate seat. Beyond her Senate seat, she ran in the 2020 Democratic presidential primary and has not given up her desire to hold executive office. She has won each of her 4 Senate terms by at least 16 percentage points in a state that Democrats have controlled for more than a decade, but often has close statewide elections. Should Ms. Klobuchar become the governor, she would appoint her own replacement, who would serve until a special election is held to complete the remainder of her term, which ends in 2030. Shortly after Mr. Walz announced he was suspending his campaign, she praised him to delivering for Minnesota. I mean, yeah, of course he's going to focus on his job. Like, his job at this point is to bow out gracefully and hopefully take accountability. Like, I don't even necessarily think him stepping down is enough at this point for the degree of fraud that has happened. Like, I don't know. This is insane. Anyone else who has failed at their job to this degree would not be getting the grace that he has. For Mr. Walz, the decision to forego a 3rd term puts a cap on a rapid rise from being a little-known Midwesterner governor to his party's vice presidential nominee to someone mentioned as a presidential top candidate on his own. Mr. Walz has spent years carefully building his profile behind the scenes, well, that's out the window, before he emerged as a potential running mate for Vice President Kamala Harris. Questions emerged about inconsistencies in his personal biography. Democrats panned his debate performance, and Ms. Harris wrote in her campaign memoir that he wasn't her first choice. Well, they're just basically throwing him under the bus now at this point. No surprises there. On Monday, his supporters said the governor's decision exemplified Mr. Walz's dedication to the state. Ken Martin, the chair of the Democratic National Committee, said, "Today's decision is entirely consistent with who Tim is." Mr. Martin, who is from Minnesota and formerly served as the chairman of the state party, added, "Tim has always believed that leadership isn't about preserving your own power. It's about using it to make a difference for as many people as possible." Well, he definitely did that by letting the amount of fraud happen in his state to the degree that he did. I mean, even seeing the videos of all the Somalian refugees and the houses that they were living in, like, this is crazy compared to what, you know, your average everyday American is experiencing here. And I think that's what's crazy about this story, is the fact that the failure to this degree is being met with little to no punishment as of right now. And in the broader context of American politics, we've seen some crazy things, not just from Democrats, but, within politics overall, such as insider trading. The Trump administration, but specifically Melania and Trump himself, doing the so-called rug pull with their meme coins. We're just constantly seeing politicians game their positions, and I think it's come time where this needs to be addressed, as far as candidates really addressing repercussions for gross incompetence in government, because I think it's inexcusable that these people can hold what are the highest positions of power in government and just completely abuse it in almost every way, from letting tax money get defrauded to insider trading and using the knowledge that you have to exploit government, or even using the meme coins to exploit your voting base. It's just, we're just in a level of it being the establishment, being Washington and the government versus the people. We're just clear, in my opinion, we're just clearly in this adversarial position where it doesn't seem like government really has the people's best interests at heart, or at best it's like we just celebrate the fact that whenever our interests align, such as sometimes like immigration, or even this whole thing with Venezuela, but on the back end, we're just being taken for almost everything that we're contributing to the system. So that's why I think this topic is really interesting, because I think it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, as we're seeing more candidates advocating more so for the people. We're seeing candidates that are running on America First policies, or being, anti-Israel, and I wonder if we're going to start seeing the same here with corruption and fraud, and if we're going to start seeing politicians start to address that. But overall, if you have made it this far in the video, please consider leaving a comment whether you agree or disagree. As the reason I make these videos is to just have a space to kind of talk about the crazy times that we're living here in politics. But yeah, if you've made it this far, please take care and be safe. Have a good one.